The film begins with Dr. Rose Cotter, a therapist, reflecting on her mother's death from when she was 10 years old. Her thoughts are interrupted by a call for a patient, Carl, who anxiously shouts about his impending death. Rose sits with him, calmly trying to reassure him. Though he expresses his overwhelming fear, she assures him he's safe. After their session, a nurse tells Rose that Dr. Morgan Desai is looking for her to talk to her. Meanwhile, Dr. Rose heads to Dr. Desai's office, where he questions her about sending a patient named Sarah Marquet to the residency the day before. She confirms that she did, but Desai expresses displeasure, noting that Sarah lacks insurance. Rose explains that Sarah has a background of drug abuse and mania, issues that require urgent treatment. Though initially hesitant and concerned about the risks, Dr. Desai eventually agrees with Rose's assessment. Shortly after leaving her office, Dr. Rose is called back by a ringing phone. She answers, finding it's an emergency call. She's urgently needed for a session with a graduate student, Laura Weaver, who has been admitted to Mount Pleasant Hospital. Laura recently witnessed her professor, Gabriel Munoz, violently taking his own life with a hammer, an event that has left her deeply shaken. Laura confides to Dr. Rose that a dark, malevolent force is tormenting her, a curse that has taken over her life. She explains that, though no one else can see it, this presence isn't a person at all. When Dr. Rose gently asks if there's any history of hallucinations in her family, Laura rejects the idea, breaking down in frustration, convinced that Rose doesn't grasp the horror she's facing. Laura insists that this entity can disguise itself as other people, always wearing a twisted, fake smile. Claiming her death is imminent, Laura suddenly panics, her expression shifting to a chilling smile before she grabs a shard from a broken vase and slashes her own neck right in front of Rose. Following the incident, detectives arrive to question Dr. Rose, and among them is her former boyfriend. They press her for details about Laura. Still visibly shaken by the traumatic event, Rose describes what Laura had shared, mentioning the supposed curse and the sinister, haunting smile of the malevolent presence. Her account provides the detectives with additional insights into Laura's disturbed mental state. The next day, as Dr. Rose gets dressed, she notices droplets of blood on her shirt, prompting her to hurriedly remove it and jump into the shower. Later that evening, lost in thought, she glimpses Laura's eerie, smiling reflection in the mirror. Her husband, Trevor, interrupts, and she reluctantly shares the disturbing events of the day. He pulls her into a comforting hug, but despite her attempts to appear composed, Rose's deep sense of dread and unease is unmistakable. Rose and Trevor join her sister Holly and Holly's husband for dinner, but Rose's mind is elsewhere, still haunted by recent events. Distracted and anxious, she finds herself disagreeing with them, having missed parts of the conversation entirely. When the topic shifts to the upcoming birthday they're planning for the next day, Rose, confused, mentions being tied up with work, even though it's Saturday, causing further tension at the table. The following morning, Rose approaches the reception nurse to inquire about the report the detectives were supposed to forward to her, and also asks about the broken vase from her patient's session. Just then, Joel, one of the detectives, appears behind her, admitting he hadn't realized she was the person he'd be investigating. Rose, unfazed, calmly assures him that he doesn't need to be involved, gently reminding him of their past relationship before walking away with ease. As Rose reviews Laura's report, she realizes it's more complex than expected. Her concentration is briefly broken by a call from her friend, Holly. During their conversation, Rose suddenly notices Laura's figure standing below, down at the base of the building, capturing her full attention and leaving her visibly unsettled. While walking through the hospital, Rose notices Carl with an eerie smile on his face. Concerned, she turns back to check on him, only for Carl to suddenly shout and lunge toward her, leaving her shaken enough to call for security. As orderlies restrain him, Rose realizes with horror that his outburst was only in her mind. Suspecting that the trauma of Laura's death has triggered a mental breakdown, her supervisor, Dr. Morgan Desai, insists that Rose take a week's leave, despite her protests. Rose returns home feeling unsettled and on edge, the emptiness of the house amplifying her unease. Suddenly, the security alarm blares, jolting her into a state of panic. As she scrambles to regain composure, a call comes in from the alarm company operator, who asks if she's safe and advises her to check behind herself. Just as she starts to turn, another phone rings, but her own phone remains on the table, untouched, creating an unnerving moment. She answers, but the call abruptly cuts off as police officers arrive to inspect the house. They find no signs of an intruder. Later, when her husband Trevor returns, Rose realizes her cat is missing, and despite searching, she is unable to find it that night. That night, Rose is tormented by memories of her mother's death, reliving the pain of her childhood. Jolting awake, she replays Laura's tragic final moments in her mind, but fear begins to creep in as she senses a presence in the room. Panicking, she grabs a knife, convinced that someone else is there. Trevor rushes in to comfort her, but her anxiety only deepens, clutching the knife tightly, her fear blurring the line between reality and hallucination. The following day, Rose seeks out her former therapist, Dr. Madeline Northcott. She confesses to experiencing disturbing hallucinations, which Madeline links to Rose's unresolved guilt surrounding her mother's intentional overdose. When Rose asks for antipsychotic medication to help, Madeline refuses, believing that Rose needs to confront these deeper emotional wounds instead. Later, Rose attends a birthday party for her 7-year-old nephew, Jackson, at her sister Holly's home. The cheerful celebration takes a dark turn when Jackson opens Rose's gift, only to find her missing cat, dead, inside the box. Horrified guests recoil, while Rose, shocked and adamant she isn't to blame, tries to explain herself. Suddenly, she's struck by another chilling vision of Laura, causing her to stumble and fall through a glass table, leaving her shaken and injured amidst the chaos. Dr. Morgan Desai pulls Rose aside, expressing concern about her well-being and suggesting that she may be dealing with severe anxiety. As he speaks, Rose's focus drifts, catching bits of a conversation between her husband, Trevor, and her sister, Holly, outside the room. The weight of their discussion seems to pull her further from the moment, heightening her sense of isolation. As Rose feels her grip on reality slipping, she tries to confide in Trevor about the curse she believes has transferred from Laura to herself. She insists that everything Laura experienced is now happening to her, but Trevor reacts skeptically. Dismissing her fears, he accuses her of inheriting her mother's mental illness and even hints that she might have been responsible for their cat's death, leaving Rose feeling more isolated and desperate. Rose opens her computer and revisits Laura's report, searching online for information about Gabriel Munoz. After diving deep into the details, she shuts off her screen and attempts to sleep, but her rest is disturbed as haunting memories from her past resurface, attacking her peace and filling her with dread. Rose visits Victoria, the widow of Gabriel Munoz, who shares disturbing sketches Gabriel drew of a dark figure he believed was trying to possess him. Victoria explains that Gabriel's descent began after witnessing a woman make herself lifeless at a conference, shortly after he was already shaken by his brother's death 2 decades earlier. When Rose presses for the woman's name, insisting that Gabriel's claims about the curse were real, Victoria becomes defensive and throws her out, unwilling to indulge Rose's unsettling theories any further. Afterward, Rose seeks out Joel, trying to approach him with a friendly demeanor. Sensing something serious, Joel asks her why she's really there. She confides in him, asking for a favor. She wants to know if there's any police record involving a man named Gabriel Munoz, and if he has connections to any recent incidents. Though hesitant and slightly skeptical, Joel reluctantly agrees after a brief argument, eventually agreeing to look into the report for her. Joel accesses a police file on Angela Powell, the real estate agent whose attempt to take her life Gabriel Munoz had witnessed. As they dig deeper, Joel discovers additional footage revealing that, days before her death, Angela had watched a man at a gas station suddenly smile eerily and then gruesomely slash his own neck with gardening shears. The chilling video leaves Rose even more convinced of a sinister connection. When Rose arrives home, she discovers that Trevor has arranged an intervention with Dr. Madeline, deeply concerned about Rose's mental state. Feeling betrayed, she angrily leaves, frustrated with Trevor's lack of support. She takes Joel's case files and heads to her sister Holly's house, hoping to convince her of the curse. However, as Rose explains, tensions rise, and Holly accuses her of displaying the same erratic behavior as their abusive mother. Showing Holly the files only intensifies her panic. Holly insists that Rose's struggles mirror their mother's mental illness. Their conversation deteriorates, ending with Holly shutting the door on her. Sitting alone in her car, Rose is suddenly engulfed by another terrifying hallucination. Joel calls Rose with startling new information. His investigation uncovered a chain of 20 similar cases where witnesses to make oneself lifeless ended up taking their own lives soon afterward. The only exception was an accountant named Robert Talley, who watched his business partner die, but instead of succumbing to death, killed a stranger 4 days later. This broke the pattern temporarily, but 1 week after Robert's violent act, the person who witnessed it took their own life, allowing the eerie sequence to continue. Joel drives Rose to visit Robert Talley in jail. Along the way, Rose confides in Joel, explaining her belief that the entity takes hold of each victim before driving them to suicide. Growing increasingly anxious, she admits she fears her time with the curse is nearly over. She then asks how much time usually passes between each victim's death. Joel replies that it's rarely more than 4 days, to which Rose responds that today marks her 4th day. Joel tries to reassure her, insisting that nothing will happen to her, though her fear remains palpable. Upon arriving at the prison, the guards grant Joel and Rose 10 minutes to speak with Robert. Initially reluctant, Robert refuses to discuss his experience. After Joel steps out to give them privacy, Robert finally confides in Rose, revealing that the only way to break the curse is by killing someone else in front of a witness, as the entity feeds on the trauma it generates. When he realizes Rose is also carrying the curse, he panics, warning her of the danger. Afterward, Rose chooses not to share Robert's unsettling revelation with Joel, keeping the information to herself. Rose accidentally cuts her hand, drawing blood, just as Dr. Madeline unexpectedly arrives at her home, apologizing for the intervention. Rose, frustrated, argues with her, and as she's about to close the door, Madeline insists that she has a duty to report Rose's case if she's a danger to herself. Just then, Rose realizes something is wrong. The real Madeline calls her on the phone, revealing that the person before her is an impersonation. The doppelganger, grinning ominously, threatens Rose. Panicked, Rose drives to the hospital, clutching a kitchen knife. She experiences a terrifying vision in which she stabs her patient, Carl, in front of Dr. Desai, who then begins tearing off his own face in horror. When the actual Dr. Desai finds her in her car holding the knife, he tries to get help, but Rose quickly drives away. Later, Joel calls to inform her that an APB has been issued due to her alarming behavior at the hospital. Rose, speaking cryptically, tells him she plans to confront the entity alone so that no witnesses will inherit the curse, then abruptly hangs up, resolute in her decision. Rose drives to her abandoned childhood home where her mother died. Inside, she faces a vision of her mother, accusing her of not helping during the overdose. Rose calls her mother an abusive monster, and the vision morphs into a monstrous creature. She sets it on fire with an oil lantern and escapes as the house burns. Believing she's free, Rose goes to Joel to apologize for involving him and being emotionally distant. But she realizes the curse is still with her when Joel's face twists into a sinister smile, fleeing. She discovers she never left her childhood home. The film concludes as the real Joel arrives. Rose locks him out to protect him, but the creature forces her to set herself on fire, leaving Joel to witness her chilling end. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed the video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.